Heavy snow falls endlessly over Winter Haven, Maine. Beneath the windswept quiet of this small town lies a quiet scheme born of human greed. Martha, our middle-aged heroine, spent decades building a life of her own. A home, savings, and a thriving fabric craft business. She'd hoped remarrying late in life would bring simple peace, yet she walked straight into a family with an insatiable hunger for her wealth. Everyone waited to watch Martha lose everything and slink away in disgrace, unaware she'd quietly woven an airtight web of evidence, biding her time for the court hearing. Unlike big cities where snow melts away in a rush, the snow here drifts slowly, silently, piling layer upon layer. Fluffy white snowflakes drift down all day long, settling atop low single-family American rooftops, blanketing wooden roadside fences and bare gnarled maple branches, as well as pop-up stalls lining Main Street beside fabric shops and cozy cafes. The air is perpetually filled with crisp snow air mixed with pine smoke from burning fireplaces, the signature gentle stillness of fall and winter in New England. Martha Cole is 58 years old and has lived in this small town for 22 full years. Her fabric workshop occupies a prime spot right on Main Street, a single-story white clapboard cottage with dark gray window frames. Snow buries the tiny front yard, leaving only neatly trimmed holly twigs peeking out. She bought this house outright at the age of 35, using savings earned over more than a decade of custom fabric orders, home textile tailoring, and vintage fabric decor crafts. There is no mortgage, and the property deed belongs solely to her, clear and unencumbered. The interior is warm and soothing, a stark contrast to the bitter winter outdoors. Floor-to-ceiling glass panes block the wind and snow, soft warm yellow floor lamps burn around the clock, and a solid wooden workbench holds neatly arranged linen cloth, wool yarn, vintage buttons, embroidery floss, and cutting patterns. The walls are lined with works she's created over the years: hand-sewn wool shawls, retro floral throw pillows, Christmas-themed fabric wall hangings, plus infant swaddles and warm scarves for elderly townsfolk made to custom order. Thick hand-woven carpets cover the floors, muffling every footstep. Embers burn slowly in the fireplace, crackling faintly now and then, filling every corner with gentle warmth. This space is far more than Martha's workplace to make a living. It is the foundation she built through a lifetime of hard work, her sole safe haven in this town. Beyond her fully paid house, Martha held a separate trust fund established before her marriage. This nest egg came from years of steady labor and frugal living, managed by a licensed local trust firm. It carried stable principal and steady interest, reserved exclusively as her safety net for old age. She had never intended to drain it to satisfy anyone else's greed. 3 years prior, 55-year-old Martha met Graham Cole at a charity event hosted by the town church. Graham was 2 years her senior, a lifelong resident of Winter Haven. He carried a mild, refined manner and was thoughtful and attentive in their early encounters. Having ended an unremarkable relationship years earlier, Martha had no desire for grand romance in middle age. All she craved was steady, peaceful companionship. She believed Graham valued gratitude and contentment, that the core of a middle-aged marriage rested on mutual tolerance and support. Thus, she let her guard down and married him. She could not have known then that Graham's gentle courtesy was reserved only for outsiders. When it came to his birth family, he had spent his entire life yielding unconditionally and taking their side without reservation. His tenderness never belonged to his wife, only to his greedy blood relatives. The first winter of their marriage brought unending snow to Winter Haven, and Martha's marriage slowly shed its thin veneer of warmth to reveal hidden rifts beneath. Graham's family was notorious around town for being petty and penny-pinching. His parents were rigid and set in their old ways, while his younger sister Leah was lazy and obsessed with superficial comfort. The whole family had spent their lives taking from others, convinced anyone with a stable life owed them endless handouts. Starting in the second month after Martha and Graham tied the knot, their nonstop demands for money rolled in, small, frequent, boundless requests that crept over Martha's life like winter frost. Leah was the first to ask for money. She married young and refused steady full-time work, staying home to raise her child. Though strapped for cash, she craved an affluent appearance. She told Graham she needed a new car for commuting and childcare runs, and without the slightest hesitation, Graham turned to Martha, urging her to dip into her savings to cover the cost. "Martha, Leah lives far from town. Her old car keeps breaking down, and it's dangerous to drive with the baby along, Graham said one evening in the living room, the fireplace fire gilding his mild yet stubborn face, his tone laced with self-evident expectation. We're financially stable now. It's only right we help family out. There's no need to be so rigid about money. At the time, Martha clung to the fragile harmony of their new marriage, unwilling to start constant fights that would sour their home life. She knew middle-aged partnerships took effort to sustain and hated letting money drive them apart. So she relented for the first time, writing a sum of money to cover Leah's down payment on the new car. She thought this was a one-time favor, simple compassion for family. She failed to realize human greed is a bottomless pit. Any show of leniency would mark her as weak and easy to exploit. Barely 2 months later, Graham's parents demanded a full renovation of their lifelong family home, claiming the walls were drafty and winter heating was inadequate. Renovations involved tedious labor and steep costs for materials and construction. Refusing to touch their own retirement savings, they took it for granted that Martha and Graham would foot the entire bill. Graham approached Martha again, a hint of pleading mixed with quiet pressure in his voice. Mom and Dad are getting on in years. They shouldn't endure harsh winters in a rundown cold house. We can afford this, and supporting them is my duty as their son. Try to see it from my side. Just set aside some of your savings. Unease settled heavy in Martha's chest this time. That trust fund was money she'd earned alone before Graham, reserved solely for her own retirement, never meant to cover unrelated family expenses. Still, watching Graham fixated on pleasing his parents and clinging to the hope of a harmonious household, she swallowed her resentment and conceded once more. Snow fell week after week, blanketing the town's roads and burying whatever warmth had remained in Martha's marriage. Every expense tied to Leah's child became another excuse to beg Martha for cash. Formula, baby food, preschool tuition, toys and seasonal clothing alike. Her in-laws also passed along all their grocery bills, heating costs and minor medical copays to Graham for reimbursement, and every last financial burden landed on Martha's shoulders. No thanks, no gratitude followed any transfer, only unspoken entitlement. If Martha hesitated even slightly, Graham would guilt-trip her. Family shouldn't tally every dollar. You're cold and selfish. Middle-aged people have to learn compromise. Martha never raised her voice or threw dramatic tantrums. Independent her whole adult life, she built stability with her own 2 hands and carried a quiet, restrained temperament. Faced with her in-laws' endless pressure and her husband's blind loyalty to his family, she never erupted into screaming arguments. Yet a chill colder than Winter Haven's winter winds settled deep inside her heart. By day, she stayed in her workshop, stitching fabric, greeting loyal regulars, chatting amiably with neighbors. Every long-term resident of town knew Martha, hardworking, gentle, with unmatched sewing skill. Fall and winter were her busiest season. Locals ordered custom wool blankets, warm shawls and holiday fabric decor, and outwardly her life looked calm and uncomplicated. Only late at night, as snow tapped against her windows and the shop fell silent, staring out at the snow-blanketed town alone, could she fully feel the exhaustion and suffocation her marriage brought. She told herself repeatedly to be more forgiving, to yield one more time. Marriage required patience. Family deserved empathy. But every compromise only emboldened their greed, pushing them to ask for more each time. One evening, as the wind whipped snow-hard against the windows, Graham returned with his family's latest demand, shattering the last thread of hope Martha held for their marriage. Martha, Mom and Dad looked into tax policies recently. Graham sat at the dinner table, speaking casually as if discussing something trivial. Your shop house was fully paid for before we married, registered only under your name, which will rack up higher tax fees down the line. They suggested transferring the deed temporarily to them to cut tax costs. Once regulations ease up, we'll switch it back to both of us. Martha's fingers tightened around her water glass, her eyes turning cold. Decades navigating work, and people had taught her to spot manipulation instantly. She saw straight through their flimsy tax loophole lie. She lifted her gaze to her husband, voice soft yet steady. And what happens once the house is in their name? Graham's eyes darted away, unable to meet hers, his answer vague and evasive. It's only temporary under their name, nothing more. We're all family. They'd never take advantage of you. Martha asked no follow-up questions, put up no fight. She knew their true nature well. Once greed takes root, it spreads wildly without restraint. This prime Main Street property held immense value, representing every year of hard work she put in. Her in-laws cared nothing about taxes. Their plan was to shift the house's title quietly to Leah and seize Martha's premarital asset entirely. Wind howled against the glass, sending tiny gusts of snow skittering across the panes. In that moment, the last faint glimmer of hope Martha had held for her marriage burned out completely. She understood at last. Every ounce of tolerance, compromise, and kindness she'd offered over 3 years had only been read as weakness by this family. They never wanted modest, occasional help. They intended to drain every cent and asset she'd built her whole life, reducing her to someone dependent on their charity. This marriage, which had begun gently, had been nothing more than a calculated scheme to take everything from her. The snow in Winter Haven piled deeper by the day, and daylight grew shorter across the town. Dawn barely broke at 8 in the morning, while dusk settled heavy by 4 in the afternoon. The whole town was wrapped in a quiet, gray-white hush, so still one could almost hear the faint sound of snowflakes hitting the ground. Martha kept to her usual daily routine, her demeanor betraying no inner turmoil whatsoever. She opened her shop punctually each morning, shoveled snow from the premises, wiped down the floor-to-ceiling windows, and sorted cloth bolts and sewing tools. When regular customers came by, she greeted them gently, listened patiently to their custom requests, and refined every fabric piece with meticulous care. If she crossed paths with neighbors for casual chat, she smiled and spoke with easy poise. No one observing her could tell her marriage was collapsing, nor that her heart had turned completely cold. To outsiders, Martha remained that mild, skilled remarried woman living a quiet, stable solo life. Only she knew her inner defenses had crumbled entirely, and every ounce of tolerance and compromise inside her was gone for good. The moment Graham brought up transferring the house deed, Martha had abandoned all hope of saving their marriage. Still, she did not weep, quarrel, or file for divorce immediately. Decades of life experience had taught her emotions solved nothing, and impulsive moves would only put her at a disadvantage. Confronting a greedy and scrupulous family head-on with arguments was pointless. It would only alert them to destroy evidence and twist their stories ahead of time. She chose the calmest, most restrained and precise path. Full compliance on the surface, comprehensive evidence collection in secret. That same night, Graham pressed her repeatedly to sign the house over, brainwashing her with lines like, "Family shares everything. Don't be so selfish, and the transfer is only temporary." In the past, Martha would hesitate, waver, and try to explain the home belonged solely to her before marriage. This time, she merely listened quietly without pushback or resistance, nodding faintly. "I understand. I'll give it serious thought." Relieved by her apparent softening, Graham's tone turned warmer as he went on. "You'll see sense sooner or later. We're blood, there's no need to draw rigid lines. Mom, Dad and Leah only want what's best for us." Martha stared down at the dancing flames in the fireplace, her eyes cold, and said nothing in reply. From that day forward, she locked away all outward emotion and began her quiet campaign to build her case. First, she pulled out her phone and turned on continuous background audio recording, set to run silently with no audible cues to avoid detection. Every subsequent conversation with Graham covering financial demands, the property transfer, and pressure to fund his family was captured in full, crystal clear. Next, she systematically organized every record of money transferred to them, starting with Leah's first car down payment from their first year of marriage, through the full renovation bill for Graham's parents' home, and the endless stream of smaller childcare, household and shopping expenses afterward. She exported digital bank statements chronologically, saved screenshots, and printed hard copies sorted into labeled binders. 3 years of unrelenting demands left thousands of individual transaction logs, ranging from large $1,000 transfers to small $50 miscellaneous payouts. Martha sorted, categorized, and marked each entry with the date, purpose, and recipient, leaving 0 gaps in her records. After the bank logs, she compiled every text and social media message exchanged with her in-laws and Leah, every unsolicited cash request, every flimsy excuse they used to beg for money, every sense of entitlement in their words, and all the guilt-tripping sent the second she hesitated were fully preserved. Every message from Graham urging her to dip into her savings, support his relatives, and surrender her personal assets was filed away one by one. The process was long, tedious, and draining. On countless snow-locked nights, long after Graham fell into deep sleep, Martha sat alone beneath the desk lamp in her workshop, sorting, cross-checking, and archiving files on her laptop and physical paperwork. Wind howled outside while soft lamplight filled the quiet room. She worked steadily, methodically, without the slightest trace of panic. She had no urge to strike back or escape early, only to fortify an unbreakable wall of evidence. She knew the only way to defeat this shameless, avaricious family was an airtight, irrefutable trail of proof. While gathering evidence, Martha quietly contacted Alan Bloom, Winter Haven's most seasoned civil attorney. Alan had practiced law in town for over 30 years, specializing in marital asset disputes and civil conversion claims. Steady, rigorous, and vastly experienced, he'd handled countless neighborhood and divorce property cases and commanded deep respect in the local courthouse. To avoid tipping off Graham's family, Martha scheduled every consultation during her shop's midday break or after closing, driving alone across snow-covered town streets to his office. Winter Road sat empty and silent, tires crunching softly over fresh snow, with no passers-by to spot her visits. At their first in-person meeting, Martha shared no emotional rants or tearful complaints. She simply laid out her organized preliminary evidence, home deed paperwork and trust fund custody documents on his desk, laying out her situation in plain, factual terms. Mr. Bloom, my house was purchased fully before marriage, and my trust fund consists entirely of assets I owned prior to marrying Graham, with official legal documentation confirming that. Over our 3 years of marriage, my husband and his family have continuously, unilaterally demanded money from me without offering any reciprocal support, in an ongoing effort to seize my personal premarital property. Now they are pressuring me to transfer my home's title under false pretenses to take ownership entirely. I need a full legal strategy to protect my assets and recover every dollar they've wrongfully taken from me. Alan scanned her neatly organized, comprehensive evidence file, a flicker of admiration crossing his face. In decades of practice, he met countless divorce clients overcome with emotion, disorganized paperwork, and disjointed stories. Rarely someone as composed, logical, and detail-oriented as Martha. "Martha, your case is remarkably clear-cut," Alan said in his steady professional tone. "The legal line separating your premarital assets is unambiguous. They hold no legal right to any portion of them. Their sustained, unprovoked financial exploitation of your personal funds qualifies as malicious conversion of private property. With complete evidence like this, the court will almost certainly order them to repay every cent they've taken." He then drafted a full timeline for continued evidence collection and courtroom strategy, advising her to maintain her cooperative front and hide all preparations until they fully exposed their malicious intent. Only then would she strike decisively. With solid legal backing, Martha grew even more unshakable and composed. When her in-laws brought new, increasingly outrageous demands, she complied without resistance. If Graham's parents asked for monthly living stipends, she transferred the money on time. If Leah texted begging for childcare funds, she sent whatever amount they requested. When Graham pressed her to move forward with a house title transfer, she replied gently, pretending to agree. Her obedience and lack of pushback lulled Graham's entire family into total complacency. To Graham, his parents, and Leah, Martha was a timid woman desperate to hold on to her marriage, easy to manipulate and drain dry. They were convinced she could not bear to end the marriage, dared not stand up to them, and that all her assets would soon belong to their family entirely. When greed faces no resistance, it expands endlessly. Satisfied Martha would comply with every demand without fight. The family's appetite grew far beyond sporadic cash handouts. They set their sights on an all-or-nothing ultimatum. One snow-heavy weekend, Graham's parents brought Leah and her child over to Martha's warm living room, sitting comfortably by the fireplace to lay out their ultimate demand directly in front of Graham. "Martha, that fabric shop barely turns enough profit to matter. There's no sense wasting your time running it," Graham's mother said, speaking with the patronizing air of someone granting a favor. "You ought to shut it down for good. stay home to care for Graham, and wait on our whole family. Sell your house on Main Street, withdraw every dollar from your trust fund, and use all of your assets to support all of us long-term. Every household expense, Leah's child's costs, everything for our family will come out of your money from here on out. Their words stripped away every thin veneer of kindness they'd ever worn. They did not merely want her money and house. They sought to strip her of her career, her independence, every source of security she'd built, turning her into a lifelong caretaker forced to fund their every need without end. Graham stood beside them, not a single word spoken to defend his wife. Instead, he nodded in agreement, his soft voice cold with selfishness. "Martha, Mom and Dad make sense. The shop's hard labor at your age. You don't need to work so tirelessly. Close the store, empty your savings, and we can all live comfortably together as one family." Wind raged outside, the fireplace still casting warm light across the room, yet Martha felt bone-deep cold wrap around her. She stared at the greedy faces crowding her living room, at the husband she'd shared 3 years of life with, who chose his blood family over her without hesitation, aiding their campaign to drain her dry. Every last trace of affection inside her faded away entirely. No anger, no shouting crossed her lips, only a quiet, calm nod. "I understand." She continued to comply, still offering no resistance. But only she knew, from that moment forward, all softness and mercy vanished. Every act of submission, every quiet compromise, existed solely to set up her inevitable reckoning. The boundless greed driving this family would carry a steep legal price they could never escape. In the depths of Winter Haven's winter, snow lingered without melting. Streets, rooftops, and woods across town lay buried under a blanket of white, turning the whole world pale and blank. Cold winds swept through alleys, swirling fine snow dust into the air and casting a somber, frigid hush over the small town. Martha carried on running her workshop as usual, serving customers, crafting fabric goods and chatting with neighbors. Her routine looked unchanged, calm and unremarkable to anyone watching. Most townsfolk had lived here for decades, simple and kind-hearted. Everyone saw Martha as gentle, hard-working and sincere, a rare, warm soul in Winter Haven. No one guessed this quiet, settled middle-aged woman was being cornered by her in-laws, who intended to drain every asset she owned. Emboldened by Martha's constant compliance, Graham's family grew bolder and more brazen by the day. They were convinced Martha was weak, clung to the marriage, and dared not fight back. Certain her house and savings were theirs for the taking, they grew tired of small, repeated handouts and craved everything at once. In their minds, enough pressure would force Martha to surrender all she owned and submit to their will. Blinded by greed, the family made their fatal mistake. 1 week after demanding Martha shut her shop, sell her home, and empty her savings to support them all, Graham's parents and sister Leah pushed him to file for divorce. Their scheme was crude and transparent. Since Martha submitted without resistance, instead of slowly picking at her funds, they would dissolve the marriage and sue for property division. They planned to seize her premarital house and entire trust fund in one go, stealing the fruits of her lifelong labor. They believed Martha had no support, was too reserved to stand up for herself, and knew nothing of legal recourse. If they wept and played the victim in court, twisting the truth to paint Martha as cold, stingy, and at fault for the broken marriage, the judge would sympathize and award them her assets. Graham had been fully brainwashed by his family, stripped of all independent judgment. Ignoring 3 years of marriage and every compromise Martha had made for them, he sided entirely with his blood relatives and readily agreed to their plan. That night, the wind and snow died down, leaving a clear, luminous night. Moonlight spilled over snow-covered rooftops, soft and still. Graham sat stiffly on the living room sofa, all trace of his usual warmth gone, and laid his cards on the table without hesitation. "Martha, Mom, Dad and Leah are right. This marriage isn't working. You care too much about your own possessions and refuse to contribute to the family. You won't lift a finger to help my relatives, and we've all suffered because of it. If you won't put my family first, we should divorce. I'll file a petition, and your house and savings will be split as compensation for everything my family has endured." Every word rang cold, selfish, and devoid of any affection. Martha sat quietly on the wooden chair across from him, watching him without shock, sorrow, or anger, only perfect calm. She had long foreseen this moment. When a person is consumed by greed, and a marriage exists only for exploitation and gain, separation is inevitable. She did not interrogate him, argue, or beg him to stay. She simply replied softly, "Very well. I agree to the divorce." Graham was caught off guard by her immediate acceptance. He quickly convinced himself this only proved she was timid, powerless, and forced to submit. Growing more arrogant, he spoke even more harshly. "If you accept, we can part civilly, but all your property must be divided. That prime Main Street house is valuable and belongs to me and my family. The full amount in your trust fund must also be handed over as reparation for the hardship you've put my relatives through." Martha gave a slight nod and fell silent. To Graham, her quietness amounted to admission, surrender, and helplessness. The next day, Graham hired an attorney and formally submitted divorce papers. His demands were plain: a share of Martha's fully paid premarital home and full access to her premarital trust fund. His grounds stated Martha had neglected her familial duties, acted cold and miserly, and refused to support his relatives, making her the sole at-fault party in their marriage. Graham's family rejoiced at the news and dropped all guard entirely. Leah bragged to every acquaintance in town that her brother would soon own a valuable storefront home and a large sum of money. She claimed their family would escape poverty and live comfortably from then on. Meanwhile, Graham's parents quietly whined to neighbors, feigning hurt and complaining their daughter-in-law was heartless and ungrateful, painting themselves as long-suffering victims. Uninformed townsfolk were misled and began to whisper that Martha was overly tight-fisted, that middle-aged spouses ought to support one another's kin. Martha paid no mind to the gossips swirling around her. She never defended herself or vented her grievances to anyone. She kept her shop running steadily, poured care into every handmade piece, and treated every customer kindly. She knew verbal disputes solved nothing. The full truth and all rightful judgment would come out in court. While waiting for the hearing date, Martha finished sorting and finalizing every piece of evidence. Thousands of bank transfer records from 3 years, hundreds of text and social media messages, and dozens of complete audio recordings were compiled into formal legal binders for attorney Alan Bloom to review and file. The evidence formed an unbroken, airtight timeline that fully proved the in-laws' persistent, one-sided exploitation and Graham's collusion to seize Martha's premarital assets. After reviewing the full dossier, attorney Alan Bloom spoke plainly to Martha. Their lawsuit has no legal standing whatsoever. The malicious exploitation is fully documented and undeniable. You will definitely win in court. You will keep all your premarital property, and every dollar they took from you over 3 years will be fully reimbursed. As they waited for the trial, snow fell on and off across Winter Haven, and the town's quiet winter rhythm continued unchanged. In her free time, Martha set up a stall at the town's weekend craft market, selling hand-knit wool shawls, fabric wall hangings, and cloth throw pillows alongside other elderly local artisans. Most vendors were lifelong Winter Haven residents, honest and genuine, free of scheming or greed. Being around them felt easy and unburdened. The more time she spent with these kind neighbors, the clearer her ideal life became. She had worked tirelessly her whole life not to chase wealth, but to live peacefully, with a clear conscience, free of manipulation, emotional drain, and able to live solely for herself. Meanwhile, Graham and his family wallowed in fantasies of sudden wealth and grew more overbearing by the day. They had already mapped out exactly how to split her assets. The house would be transferred to Leah for her family home and children's school district, while the trust money would fund renovations to their old house, a new car for Leah, and all their family living expenses. They were certain they would win, convinced Martha had no means to fight back and would be crushed by their lawsuit. They never imagined that the seemingly meek, compliant woman had spent countless lonely winter nights building an impenetrable wall of evidence, crafting a flawless legal trap. All they waited for was the day of the hearing, when their greedy schemes would crumble to nothing in a single decisive blow. Mid-December brought Winter Haven its harshest winter storm of the year. Frigid winds howled as heavy snow swirled nonstop, burying the entire town beneath a thick blanket of white. Roads turned slippery, pedestrians were few and far between, and a vast pale gray haze stretched across heaven and earth. The town's civil court sat at the heart of Winter Haven, a stately 2-story brick building with solemn outer walls and neatly framed windows. It stood quietly all year round, bearing witness to the town's countless civil disputes and untangling right from wrong. The divorce asset division hearing convened as scheduled. Graham arrived early with his parents and sister Leah. The four were neatly dressed, radiating unshakable confidence, even tinged with smug certainty. They had rehearsed their lines in advance, planning to weep and play the victim before the judge, twisting the truth to brand Martha as cold, selfish, heartless, and neglectful of family, all to win sympathy and seize her property. In the waiting room before court opened, they spoke in hushed, relaxed tones, utterly convinced they would prevail. "Don't worry, the judge will side with us," Graham's mother murmured firmly. "We're honest, hard-working folks who've struggled for years. She owns a house and a fortune all to herself, yet refuses to lift a finger for family. It's pure selfishness." A grin tugged at Leah's mouth, unable to hide her glee. "Once we win this case and get the house, I'll sell my old place and move somewhere decent. We'll never scrape by again." Graham wore a calm exterior, fully certain victory was his. To his mind, Martha had no proof, was quiet and unassertive, and would have no way to defend herself in the formal courtroom. She would simply surrender without a fight. Shortly afterward, Martha arrived alone. She wore a plain, clean dark overcoat, her hair neatly combed, standing tall with unruffled composure, not a trace of panic or nervousness on her face. After months of quiet planning and evidence gathering, her heart was steady, and she stood firm in her truth. Attorney Alan Bloom walked beside her, clutching a thick stack of evidence binders, poised, professional and commanding. The two sides faced each other across the waiting room. 4 people huddled together, arrogant and calculating, versus one solitary woman, calm, collected and fully prepared. The contrast in their demeanors spoke volumes. Seeing Martha's unperturbed expression, Graham dismissed it as a hollow show of bravery masking inner terror, and looked down on her even more. The hearing officially began as the judge took his seat, and silence fell over the courtroom. Per procedure, Graham, the plaintiff, spoke first to state his claims and grounds for the divorce. He rose to his feet, his mild tone masking deliberate deception, systematically twisting every fact. He deliberately omitted years of relentless financial demands, pressure to transfer the house deed, and their plot to seize Martha's premarital assets, only recounting one-sided accounts of supposed marital strife. "Your Honor, my marriage to the defendant Martha has never been harmonious over these 3 years. The defendant enjoys substantial financial means, a fully paid home and a large trust fund, yet she is miserly and deeply self-centered, unwilling to make any sacrifices for our family. My parents are elderly and frail, and my sister struggles financially raising her child alone, burdened by heavy household costs. Time and again we ask the defendant for modest assistance, only to be coldly rejected each time. The defendant prioritizes her craft shop and her own comfort above all else, ignoring my family's hardships and failing to uphold her marital obligations. She bears sole responsibility for the breakdown of this marriage. I therefore petition the court to divide the defendant's real estate and savings, to compensate my family for our losses and redress the years of hardship we have endured." His speech sounded heartfelt and convincing, painting his family as kind, vulnerable victims wronged by an unfeeling wife. Once Graham finished his statement, his parents and Leah took the stand one after another to add their testimony, launching a coordinated display of tearful victimhood. Graham's parents, advanced in age, lowered their voices on purpose, speaking in quivering, aggrieved tones that distorted every truth. "Your Honor, our family has lived an honest, peaceful life and never quarreled with anyone. We welcomed our daughter-in-law wholeheartedly after the wedding, treating her as one of our own, yet she remained distant and guarded at every turn. We only occasionally asked for small help for our struggling younger daughter or simple repairs to our aging home, never unreasonable requests. And each time she turned us away flat out. She holds vast wealth and watches our family scrape by and suffer, yet refuses to spare a single dollar. Her heart is utterly cold." Leah's eyes welled up on cue as she feigned distress. "I raised my child all alone under immense financial strain, barely making ends meet. I only hoped my sister-in-law could offer a little support to ease my child's burdens, yet she was always cheap and guarded, never valuing our family bond. Her coldness destroyed my brother's marriage and left our whole family suffering for years. The three played off one another seamlessly, their tearful accounts shifting all blame onto Martha and framing themselves as innocent, wronged victims. For a moment, the courtroom rang with their cries and accusations. Anyone unaware of the full truth could easily be fooled into believing Martha was a cold, selfish, stingy woman. Every eye in the room turned to Martha, sitting alone at the defendant's table. Faced with this unprincipled slander and wholesale distortion of the truth, Martha's expression never shifted. No anger, no outburst, no flicker of emotion crossed her face. She sat quietly, her gaze clear and steady, letting them perform their lies and slander to their heart's content. She knew falsehoods could never stand up to hard evidence. Her silence now existed only to pave the way for her decisive counterattack. When the plaintiff's side finished all testimony, the judge turned to Martha and Attorney Bloom and asked in a grave voice, "Does the defense wish to submit a response and present evidence?" Attorney Bloom stood unhurriedly, holding his heavy binders, his tone steady, powerful, and crystal clear. "Your Honor, the defense categorically denies every false statement put forward by the plaintiff's side. This case is not a matter of the defendant being cold and refusing family support. Instead, the plaintiff's entire family has waged a long-term, sustained, one-sided campaign to extract money from the defendant, coveting and attempting to seize her premarital personal assets. When their endless demands went unfulfilled, driven by insatiable greed, they initiated this divorce lawsuit in an unlawful bid to confiscate the defendant's private property through legal channels. The defense will now submit a complete chain of evidence to reveal the full, unvarnished truth." The instant the words left his mouth, the atmosphere in the courtroom shifted completely. Graham and his family, who had moments earlier been cocky and triumphant, stiffened on the spot, a sudden unease creeping over them. Staring at the towering stack of evidence binders in the attorney's hands, they felt the first twinges of genuine fear. A profound silence fell over the courtroom, broken only by the judge's steady breathing and the soft rustle of turning paper pages. Attorney Alan Bloom proceeded with the presentation of evidence in a methodical, unhurried manner. He avoided emotional outbursts entirely, grounding every statement in tangible exhibits and legal statutes. His reasoning was airtight and organized, each remark striking straight to the heart of the matter, unassailable by any counterargument. First, he submitted the property deed and notarized trust fund documents. "Your Honor, official title registrations and certifications from the trust institution confirm the following. The defendant Martha's single-family storefront residence was purchased prior to the marriage with full cash payment, carrying zero mortgage liability, with 100% sole title vested in the defendant. All funds held within the defendant's trust fund are personal savings accumulated before wedlock, secured and locked under trust administration prior to the marriage. By statutory definition, these qualify as separate premarital assets, bearing no legal connection to the plaintiff and exempt from marital property division. The documents bore crisp official seals and clear legal validity, instantly dismantling the plaintiff family's core claim to seize Martha's property at its very root. Next, Attorney Bloom displayed 3 full years of bank transfer records on the courtroom monitor. Thousands of transaction entries scrolled across the screen, spanning the entire 3-year marriage, each entry marked with clear dates, exact dollar amounts, and stated purposes. The records covered Leah's vehicle down payment, auto insurance and daily commuting expenses, home renovation labor and material costs, winter heating bills, and household shopping for Graham's parents, plus miscellaneous expenditures for Leah's child including formula, preschool tuition, toys and children's apparel, every single payment fully traceable. Every transfer originated solely from Martha's premarital assets and was deposited directly into bank accounts belonging to Graham's relatives. There existed not a single reciprocal payment or comparable financial contribution from his family to Martha. Over 3 years, the total sum the in-laws had extracted unilaterally from Martha reached tens of thousands of US dollars. Over these 3 years, the defendant continuously provided uncompensated financial support to the plaintiff's entire family, voluntarily covering all their household, childcare, and home repair costs without hesitation or refusal. The plaintiff's allegations in open court that the defendant is cold, selfish, and unwilling to assist her spouse's kin directly contradict the documented facts. The black and white transaction logs left no room for denial, instantly shattering every tearful, fabricated hardship story the plaintiff family had spun. Graham and his relatives paled visibly, all traces of their prior arrogance vanishing in an instant as their bodies stiffened with tension. They had never imagined Martha would catalog every minor transfer completely and precisely, omitting not a single entry. Attorney Bloom then presented screenshots of text messages and social media exchanges for the court to review. The screen displayed endless unsolicited money requests sent over months and years by Graham's parents and Leah, filled with thinly veiled excuses, unearned entitlement, and guilt-tripping rhetoric deployed whenever Martha hesitated to send cash. "We're short on money! Send us some to cover household costs. Childcare costs are overwhelming. As her aunt, you're obligated to chip in. We're short on funds for the house renovation. You have to cover the gap. You're financially well off. Supporting us is simply what you owe the family." Line after line laid bare the family's insatiable greed and exploitative nature. Every demand was one-sided, boundless and entirely one-sided extraction, devoid of genuine familial affection and driven purely by cold financial calculation. Finally, the most pivotal piece of evidence was played in full, complete unedited audio recordings captured throughout their interactions. The courtroom speakers broadcast unaltered, uncut original audio from past conversations. The recordings contained full exchanges in which Graham repeatedly pressured and coerced Martha into transferring her premarital property deed, laying bare the family's true scheme, hiding behind a false tax-saving pretext to secretly reassign the home's title to Leah. The tapes also captured every instance where the in-laws demanded Martha shut down her craft workshop, sell her premarital home, and withdraw every dollar from her trust fund to fund their household indefinitely. Graham's voice echoed clearly throughout, showing consistent bias toward his family, pressuring his wife to surrender her legal personal assets and abetting their intentional financial exploitation. Raw, unfiltered dialogue, unvarnished schemes, and unrelenting coercion reverberated through the solemn courtroom, tearing down every layer of performative innocence and falsehood the plaintiff family had constructed. The weight of irrefutable evidence crushed all room for rebuttal. Graham's parents and Leah, who had minutes earlier sobbed and twisted the truth to play victims, fell abruptly silent, their faces ashen, unable to utter a single word, feigning hurt. Graham bowed his head, his features dark and rigid, too ashamed to meet the judge's gaze. A heavy silence blanketed the room as every spectator grasped the complete truth of the case. Martha had never been cold or ungenerous toward her spouse's family. Instead, Graham's relatives were consumed by unbridled avarice, steadily draining her premarital assets, emboldened by her repeated concessions, until they filed for divorce in a desperate bid to seize every penny she had earned over a lifetime. Attorney Bloom wrapped up his evidence presentation with a calm, authoritative closing summary. "Your Honor, the facts of this case are unambiguous, supported by an unbroken, complete chain of evidence. The plaintiff's entire family engaged in prolonged, intentional malicious conversion of the defendant's separate premarital property. The plaintiff Graham actively colluded with his birth family to coerce his spouse into surrendering her legally protected personal assets, knowingly enabling and participating in their exploitative conduct with clear malicious intent, all of which has been fully proven on record. Throughout the marriage, the defendant exercised extraordinary forbearance and continuously provided unrequited financial support to the plaintiff's relatives, fulfilling every reasonable familial obligation to the fullest extent possible. Driven by insatiable greed and frustrated that their endless demands could not be satisfied, the plaintiff's family initiated this malicious divorce litigation in an unlawful attempt to seize the defendant's separate property. Their legal claims lack any factual or statutory basis and must be fully dismissed. Furthermore, all sums wrongfully extracted from the defendant over 3 years by the plaintiff's family shall be repaid in full. After the conclusion of his statement, the courtroom remained silent for several long seconds. The judge reviewed all physical exhibits, digital transaction logs, and audio recordings alongside the oral testimony delivered during the hearing. With the facts fully established and legal precedent firmly supporting the defense, he delivered a final judgment from the bench on the spot. After consideration of all evidence presented to this court, the storefront residence and trust fund registered under defendant Martha are legally protected separate premarital assets, with clear title delineation exempt from marital property division. The plaintiff holds no legal right to claim or partition either asset. Plaintiff Graham and his family persistently extracted financial funds unilaterally from the defendant throughout the marriage with clear intent to wrongfully convert her personal property. The facts are fully substantiated by conclusive evidence. The court hereby orders the entire plaintiff household to repay all large sums extracted over the 3-year marriage, in full accordance with the itemized evidence log, with full remittance due within 30 calendar days. Plaintiff Graham actively conspired with his birth family to unlawfully seize his spouse's personal assets, bearing sole marital fault for the breakdown of the marriage. He is hereby statutorily disqualified from any claim to division of marital joint property. All relief sought in the plaintiff's divorce petition is hereby denied in its entirety. Each line of the ruling rang firm and definitive, carrying unshakable legal weight. In an instant, Graham's family crumpled completely, their faces drained of all color and their bodies trembling uncontrollably. They would walk away with not a single dollar or inch of the home they had coveted for years. Not only had they failed to seize Martha's assets, they faced an obligation to repay every cent they had drained from her over 3 years, the crushing weight of the judgment obliterating every greedy fantasy they had nurtured. Graham's parents' legs buckled beneath them, nearly collapsing in the plaintiff's seating area, overcome with hopeless despair, all traces of their prior arrogance erased. Leah's eyes welled with bitter resentment, yet the mountain of undeniable evidence and binding court ruling left her with no grounds to argue or resist. Graham sat hunched and silent, his complexion gray and bloodless, utterly broken. He had single-handedly destroyed 3 years of marriage, betrayed his wife's endless patience and compromise, and enabled his family's exploitative greed, landing himself with nothing but unmitigated blame and irreversible loss. Beneath the unblinking eyes of every person present in the courtroom, the carefully crafted facade of kindness, victimhood, and innocence the family had built collapsed entirely. Their true nature, greedy, deceitful, and ungrateful, was laid bare for all to witness, leaving them utterly disgraced with nowhere to hide their shame. Martha, who had remained composed and quiet through the entire hearing, finally released a quiet, weightless breath at that moment. There was no wild elation or triumphant arrogance, only quiet relief after months of suppression, quiet endurance, and agonizing uncertainty. Through months of silent strategic planning, meticulous evidence preservation, and calm, principled legal advocacy, she had safeguarded every asset earned through a lifetime of labor, defended her personal boundaries and dignity, and severed all ties with her insatiably greedy in-laws for good. The bitter winter winds still raged outside Winter Haven, yet Martha's world had at last cleared, calm and unclouded once more. The hearing drew to a close, the judgment took legal effect, and the whole dispute finally reached its end. Winter Haven was a small, sparsely populated town where word spread fast among neighbors. Word of the court ruling, along with the full truth of Graham's family's greedy schemes, their deliberate distortion of facts, and malicious plunder of Martha's assets, quickly rippled through every corner of the town. All townsfolk who had once been misled instantly understood the whole story. They finally realized Martha was never cold, stingy, or unkind to relatives. Instead, Graham's family was insatiably greedy, constantly pushing their luck without any moral bottom line. They had spent years draining Martha, who had always compromised and tolerated them, and even after their misdeeds were laid bare, they tried to twist the truth to win sympathy. Most residents of a town were honest and upright, and they detested familial emotional blackmail, greedy scheming, and ingratitude above all else. Once the truth came out, everyone looked down on Graham's family with unmasked disdain. Neighbors deliberately kept their distance. No one was willing to chat or associate with them anymore. Relatives and old acquaintances who had once maintained casual contact all avoided them on purpose, refusing to be seen in their company. The whole family became the town's laughingstock, thoroughly disgraced and shunned, unable to hold their heads up in the community they had lived in for years. The heaviest blow fell in the form of the massive repayment order from the court. The total sum the in-laws had extracted from Martha over 3 years was far beyond their ability to pay. Graham's parents had barely any life savings. Leah held no steady job and struggled financially year-round, and Graham only earned an ordinary salary. none of them could afford to pay the full sum within the court's deadline. To comply with the judgment and avoid compulsory enforcement by the court, they had no choice but to sell off their possessions and mortgage their real estate. The single-family house where Graham's parents had lived for decades was foreclosed and sold, and their family car was disposed of at a steep loss. They emptied every penny they had and sold every valuable item they owned just to scrape together most of the repayment amount. Their barely sustainable life collapsed completely, leaving them financially ruined. Once an ordinary stable household, they sank into the poorest, most destitute family in town. The family that once dreamed of draining Martha dry to live a life of abundance ended up with absolutely nothing, stripped of all their belongings. Their fate proved an age-old truth. Greed turns on itself, and every selfish craving bears bitter fruit. Graham's fate was even more miserable and irreversible. He held a steady clerical job in town, where personal character and family reputation were critical to holding onto his position. Once the scandal of him colluding to seize his wife's property, enabling his family to exploit her throughout the marriage, and filing a false malicious lawsuit to twist the truth became public, his reputation and professional image were completely destroyed. Colleagues and supervisors alike spoke harshly of him. Overwhelmed by public criticism and workplace scorn, Graham eventually lost his stable job, cutting off his only source of income. Now nearing 60, he owned no property, held no employment, had no good name, and no relatives or friends willing to lend him support. He lived alone in poverty, scraping by day after day in Winter Haven. Desperate and consumed by regret, Graham showed up at Martha's door countless times to beg for forgiveness. Amid bitter winter snowstorms, he stood repeatedly outside her workshop in her front yard, whispering tearful confessions and desperate pleas. He poured out his remorse and regret, begging Martha to soften her heart and forgive him, hoping to reconcile, return to their old quiet life, and rely on her financial support once more. Faced with his belated remorse and humble supplications, Martha remained calm and unwavering, turning him away firmly every single time. She never spoke harshly, mocked him, or dwelled on old grievances. She simply, and gently yet resolutely shut down every possibility of reconciliation. I gave you and your family every ounce of compromise and tolerance I had to offer. It was your endless greed and unrelenting pressure that destroyed everything. You alone must bear all the consequences of your choices. Her soft tone carried unshakable clarity and resolve. She had long seen through his true nature. Beneath his mild surface lay blind filial obedience and unbridled selfishness, a cold heart that would sacrifice his wife's everything without hesitation for his birth family. Their broken marriage, years of emotional exhaustion, and countless grievances could never be mended, nor were they worth salvaging. Rejected time and again, Graham could only trudge away in desolation, forced to live with the tragic outcome he had single-handedly created, trapped in endless regret and destitution. Winter winds still swept across Winter Haven, yet Martha's life had transformed entirely. She kept everything she had built over a lifetime safe and sound. Her storefront cottage stood untouched, her warm fabric workshop stayed open for business, and her premarital trust fund remained fully intact. Every bit of her hard work and security was preserved without loss. Freed from endless financial demands, manipulation, emotional drain, and guilt-tripping, her life settled into quiet, unburdened peace. With no marital strife or in-law harassment weighing on her, she could finally lay down all compromise and forbearance, living solely for herself. Her workshop continued to thrive, and longtime townsfolk still sought out her delicate, exquisite handmade textiles, trusting both her craftsmanship and her character. Opening the shop each morning, stitching cloth, and creating craft pieces filled her days with quiet healing, steadying her heart and bringing her inner peace and fulfillment. On free weekends, she still set up a stall at the town's weekly craft market. The winter market was warm and lively, filled with soft chatter and the faint smell of wood smoke. Vendors and shoppers were all sincere local residents, free of scheming and greed, bound only by genuine greetings and the simple warmth of small-town life. She chatted freely with other elderly artisans, exchanged sewing techniques, and shared light-hearted winter stories, gradually building a circle of new kind, genuine, down-to-earth friends. Winter snow would continue to fall over Winter Haven every year, white, quiet, and soft as always. But never again would Martha endure endless demands, unspoken sorrows, or suffocating manipulation. She tended her shop and her home, secure in her savings. She rose each dawn to work with cloth and settled by her fireplace at dusk to rest. On her free days, she wandered the market and met her friends, living a clean, unhurried, and relaxed life. That draining marriage and all its calculated greed were nothing more than a chapter of the past. Through quiet endurance and clear judgment, Martha protected the security she had earned over decades. Through the law, she defended her self-worth and boundaries. She had broken free from the chains of human greed and left behind years of emotional exhaustion. For all the winters and years ahead, she would stand steady through every storm, master of her own joys and sorrows, living a calm, peaceful life only for herself.